My name is Helen McVitie O'Hara, and I am the Training and Engagement Officer for Glaucoma UK, covering Northern Ireland. So tonight's webinar is about glaucoma research and overview. But before we get started, I want to kind of launch a poll. So we're going to have a one-question poll, which will hopefully, by the end of today's session, you will have a better understanding about glaucoma research. So the poll is going to appear on the screen. Just one question. For anybody using a screen reader, it will make a bong and then it will appear on your screen. So if you just answer that one question, we will again ask the same question at the end. And as I say, hopefully by the end, we'll make a big difference in understanding around glaucoma. I'm looking forward to learning about what's going on in relation to research. Okay, we're nearly there. Okay, just one more minute and then we'll get started. And I'll explain the format of what's happening tonight because we have some new people who are joining us tonight who've never been to one of these before. Okay, still numbers are going up. I don't want to end it too soon. Okay, I'm going to end it there. So thank you everybody for taking part in the poll. So the format of tonight is we have a speaker who is Joanna Hodgkinson, or Jo, who is the head of research here at Glaucoma UK. So Jo is going to give us an update about what's going on in relation to glaucoma research. But before we get started, I just want to kind of talk about something that's really important. So Jo is going to be talking very much about what's going on in relation to research. And we're really grateful for speakers for coming along and giving their time. We invite speakers who are knowledgeable on the topic being presented. The information shared tonight is based on their own experience and knowledge and does not replace individual medical advice. Your circumstances are unique to you. So if you're thinking of making any lifestyle or medical changes as a result of tonight's webinar, please speak to your eye specialist first. Glaucoma UK and the speakers are not responsible for any action you might take as a result of the information you learned through tonight's webinar. So to say, we're going to welcome Jo, or Joanna, and she's going to give an overview about what is the current priorities in relation to glaucoma research. And she'll also look at the challenges that researchers face. So as Jo's presenting, please put through your questions. So you'll see there's a Q&A option on the screen. Any questions you have in relation to research, please pop them in the Q&A. And then towards the last 20 so minutes of tonight's session, Jo will try her best to answer any questions. Okay, so now I'm going to hand you over to Jo, who's going to enlighten us all about research.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks ever so much for the invite to speak to you tonight. It's been a little while since I've been at a DGSG. Obviously, I used to do some a good while ago, but it's really nice to come back and see many of you on screen again. So tonight I'm going to give you, as Helen said, an introduction to glaucoma research. So we're going to look at some kind of key themes in glaucoma research and why they're priorities, and give you a bit of insight into what Glaucoma UK is funding within those topics, because we do fund research as well ourselves. So let me just get my timer going, so I leave lots of time for questions at the end. So as we said, I'm head of research. So just a bit of context, I'm not actually a researcher. I have a science degree, but I'm not an active researcher, and I'm also not a clinician. So if you ask any questions about your treatments and things, I'm going to refer you to your clinician rather than myself. So just a little reminder of Glaucoma UK's work and where research fits into that picture. So you may be aware that we have 4 streams of activity. We raise awareness of glaucoma so that people get their eyes tested and get diagnosed as soon as possible, particularly those most at risk. We provide support to people living with glaucoma so that they feel part of a community and they know how to manage their treatments and things. We support research and development into all aspects of glaucoma. So that's treatment as well as monitoring, prevention, management in hospitals and things. And we help researchers tell you, the people that matter most, about the research that they've been doing. And our fourth stream is we influence policy and professional practice so that the care pathways take into account your needs. So my role is to manage that third work stream. It's quite new for us to have someone working on this. We are really investing in our research work. So there'll be places where potentially you ask me a question and I say, not yet, but give me another year or two, and we're working on it. So I just request a bit of your patience for this, but also your excitement, because hopefully you'll see us do more and more, talk more about the research that we've been funding and the impact that has. Right, so who else does research? So, and what is research all about? So this is just a bit of an understanding of the landscape around glaucoma research. So obviously the point of medical research, healthcare research, is to help people. So we want everyone to live happier, healthier, longer lives. The end goal of all health research is the general population. We want everyone to benefit from it. Most research in the UK is carried out in universities and in hospitals, and they often work really closely together because you have sort of professional researchers working in the universities, but the people who are actually delivering the care are in the hospitals, and often people have sort of wear two hats. They have both roles. The funding for research, usually, about half of the funding in the country for health research comes from the government. So the big government funders are UK Research and Innovation, that's the kind of main one. And then the National Institute for Health and Care Research is a body that sits underneath the umbrella of UK Research and Innovation. But there are other ones that might fund things like the Medical Research Council and things. But, the National Institute of Health and Care Research, NIHR, fund really, really big trials, ones that cost millions of pounds and take years and years and years, that are all about getting maybe a new treatment to patients within the NHS. About the other half, roughly, a bit under, comes from charities such as ourselves, as well as other, there are loads of charities that are funding medical research. You may have heard of the Wellcome Trust, which is has an enormous endowment that funds research kind of all over the world into all sorts of different topics. You also get, there are also other eye care charities funding research, Fight for Sight, and some are associated with hospitals. So Moorfields Eye Charity is associated with Moorfields Hospital, but it also funds research into eye care. And then us as well. So we're quite small, we're a relatively small player when it comes to eye care research. We fund, we're working towards sort of a bit over £500,000 a year, but that doesn't go very far within research. So we are a relatively small funder, but we're the only funder in the UK that is totally focused on glaucoma research. All of the money that we spend on research goes to glaucoma, and we're unique from that point of view. And all of our funding, how do we fund research ourselves? Well, all of our funding comes from our supporters, our members who are giving us donations or maybe have left us money in their will in the form of a legacy. And we're super, super grateful to obviously everyone who is donating money to the charity to enable us to fund research. There are also the sort of third component of the research funders are sort of pharmaceutical companies or people who are making devices, medical devices, or instruments associated with monitoring diseases and things, such as Alcon and Santen. Some of you may use eye drops by Alcon or Santen, or you may have a device in your eye that was manufactured and produced by one of these companies. So they're also doing research into their own devices and treatments and trying to sort of develop new treatments as well. So sort of private companies, private money is involved in research as well. So it's quite a complicated picture. There's lots of different moving parts, of which we are, important within glaucoma, of course, but ultimately quite a small player at the moment. Wouldn't it be great if we were bigger? The reason I think research for glaucoma, by the way, is so important is because it is the key ultimately to helping us reach our organisational mission of an end to glaucoma sight loss. There are treatments, they do work, we can raise awareness, but ultimately the things that are going to make the biggest difference to people with glaucoma is a whole new way of treating it that maybe stops it forever, or even potentially restores vision due to that's been lost to glaucoma. So research is the way that we can have the biggest difference ultimately as a glaucoma charity, and ultimately would be amazing if we didn't even need to exist, because that research was so amazing that no one had glaucoma anymore. So it's a really, really important part of what we do as a charity. So I know some of you will know quite a lot about glaucoma, but some of you won't know much at all. And I wanted to talk through some of the kind of principles of glaucoma, some of the key attributes of glaucoma that are important when it comes to glaucoma research. So I'm sure lots of you know that it is damage to the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is sending signals from the eye to the brain, helping the brain process what the eyes are seeing. And in glaucoma, the fundamental of glaucoma is that optic nerve is damaged and the signals can no longer be sent from the eye to the brain. And so that leads to vision loss. And that is usually starts with the periphery, so the sort of edge of your vision rather than your central vision, because of the way that the nerves get damaged. That's why it tends to be peripheral vision loss. And because it's peripheral, another key point is that it's usually symptomless. So most people with glaucoma don't know they're losing sight. And that's because your brain's really clever and it's sort of filling in those gaps in the vision that have been created. So that's really significant. You if you have glaucoma can't monitor your own vision loss yourself. That's why you have to go to the hospital to have your dreaded visual field test machine tests. The sight loss is irreversible. So once you have lost any vision due to glaucoma, at the moment there is we can't recover that. Those optic nerve cells have been damaged or killed, and we don't know currently. I'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but we don't know currently how to make those cells recover. So any vision that's lost is lost forever, unfortunately. But it is preventable. We're really lucky within glaucoma compared to some other eye conditions that there are lots of treatments that are available, and those treatments are proven to work. And if one treatment doesn't work, there is another one available for you for many, many people. So there are treatments that are available for glaucoma. It is largely preventable. Once you're diagnosed, that vision loss can be stopped or slowed down for many people. And the way we manage that at the moment is through pressure. So at the moment, the only risk factor that we can do anything about, that we can modify, is pressure. So all treatments at the moment are about lowering the pressure in your eye through different mechanisms. They all work in different ways, but that is currently the key to trying to stop any vision loss, trying to protect that optic nerve, is we reduce the pressure in the eye. But we also know there are other factors in play. So it is a disease of aging generally for most people. As we get older, we're more likely to get glaucoma. That's because generally our bodies don't work as well as we get older. And that includes some of the structures and mechanisms and bits and pieces in the eye that are involved in the optic nerve or the fluid production and drainage. But we also know genetics are really, really important. Glaucoma is largely a genetic disease. So whether you get glaucoma or not depends a lot on your genes. That is why, again, ethnicity is quite a significant factor, because different ethnic groups have different combinations of genes that are more or less common. And so Black people are most at risk of glaucoma. They tend to get it younger than other populations. They tend to get it a bit more aggressively. But East Asian groups are also a bit more likely to have a particular type of glaucoma called angle closure. So there are other risk factors in play, but pressure is the only one at the moment that we can do anything about. And finally, another important part for glaucoma that drives research is it develops quite slowly. So most people will if they take their treatments and they're in the system, they will probably retain useful sight for life. So, and treatments might act over quite a long period of time. And that's another thing that kind of influences glaucoma research. So bear those in mind. I'll be referring back to those as throughout the talk. So what I wanted to talk through is a bit about what's happening in the kind of wider system in terms of eye research and where glaucoma fits in. So you may be aware of the James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnership priorities, which were published about 12 years ago and sort of set out a bunch of priorities for glaucoma research as well as other bits of eye research. And that was updated a year or two ago in the UK Clinical Eye Research Strategy. So that was a group of researchers that wanted to identify across the whole of the eye research community, anyone with a stake, anyone with an interest, what do you think are the most important themes, the most important topics, the most important unanswered questions within eye research? So they did a survey. Some of you may have responded because we sent it out at the time as well. Over 2,000 people responded, of whom 70% were patients. Others were maybe researchers, people, like I think I responded as a sort of someone who works for a charity. So it was a real sort of cross-section across the whole of the research, anyone with an interest in different aspects of eye care. What do you think are the most important things? And they looked at 9 subspecialties, so glaucoma. They also looked at macular and retinal issues. They looked at cornea, childhood diseases, childhood eye care. And it was a collaboration across all sorts of different organisations. So there was input from the government, input from professional bodies such as the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. And the aim was to refocus the most important research questions within each subspecialty so that research funding could go to the most critical areas, so that the whole of the research community could say these are the bits that we need to focus on. And this is a quote from the paper, that funding for eye research is limited. So it's important to identify the unanswered questions of the highest clinical importance so that research targeting the greatest needs can be well invested for the benefits of patients and public in the future. So it was quite an important line from the paper. And out popped from this piece of work 6 priorities for glaucoma. So I'm going to talk through each of those priorities in turn, and why they're a priority from my point of view, and where Glaucoma UK is funding some research or involved in some research within each of those priorities. So this is just my view. As I said, I'm not a researcher. I've been doing this role for about a year. So I have a kind of good overview. I don't have a particular stake in any of it, but it is just, this is just my opinion of what I think are the most important bits and why. Oh, bear with me. So firstly, the first priority was, what are the most effective treatments for glaucoma and how can they be improved? So why do I think they're the most important? What is a priority? Well, because I said glaucoma is preventable. There are treatments that are available. But currently, pressure, as I said, is the only modifiable risk factor, despite the fact that we know there are other things that are influencing whether someone gets glaucoma, such as your genes or your age. So there are treatments. Some people respond really well to treatments. Some people struggle. They have really bad side effects to their eye drops, or maybe they're taking 3 types of eye drops and they're still losing vision. So these treatments kind of can and do work for lots of people, but we know that they can be improved. We know they could be targeted better so that, wouldn't it be great if someone could just say, this is the one that's going to work for you and you can take this for the rest of your life? Or, we know that actually, with your profile, then the best option for you is surgery and we'll do that straight away and you won't have to kind of mess around with drops for a few years. So, or alternatively, maybe there's a treatment we can find that isn't about pressure, that is fixing something else within the eye that means you don't even have high pressure and you don't even you never lose any vision. So we know that there's sort of more we could do within glaucoma treatments that target more of the kind of complexities behind glaucoma that mean therefore treatments are more effective. Because we are lucky there are treatments, but they could definitely be improved. So where does our glaucoma fit in? So our funding, sorry, fit in. So this is a piece of work that's just coming to the end as a project, which is looking at the effectiveness of MIGS. So MIGS are minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries. There are a range of different sort of devices or sort of small surgeries that you can have that aim to improve the drainage of fluid out of the eye. There are loads of these available. Every time you look, there's another one that's been sort of created or developed. And we don't quite know yet which ones are really good and who would benefit from this treatment type 1, MIGS type 1 compared to MIGS type 2, and sort of what are the risk factors and how can we make sure basically if someone's going to have a MIGS that we know it's going to work really effectively. So that's one piece of work. I can't tell you the outcomes yet because it hasn't quite been published, but that's a piece of work that we're looking at. And I know she's found some really interesting insights into kind of particular groups are maybe more or less likely to benefit from the different MIGS devices that are available. So could help you and your clinicians decide on what is the best treatment option for you. Another piece of work is another one that we're just funding, hasn't started yet as a project, but it's trying to find a totally new treatment for glaucoma. So we know that the fluid is draining out of the eye. There's too much fluid in your eye and it's draining out of the eye through something called the trabecular meshwork, which is like a sponge. And there is a lot of evidence that there is inflammation, there's swelling that's happening inside that trabecular meshwork, and that means that the fluid can't drain as effectively as possible, so the pressure is building up in the eye, and that's what causes glaucoma. So this group, who are based at Ulster University in Northern Ireland, are trying to have created an antibody which can maybe stop that inflammation from happening and stop the pressure from building up in the eye. So an antibody is part of your body's own immune system. You have antibodies every time you have a cold, your body's producing lots of antibodies, and it addresses the kind of the bugs in the case of a cold. But this is going to, instead of attacking the bug that's causing the cold, it's attacking a protein, part of your kind of the chemicals in your body that are there all the time. There's too much of this protein, so you can produce an antibody that stops this protein from triggering this sort of pathway that causes the inflammation. So it's super early days. There is sort of signs of promise that maybe, would suggest this antibody has been proven to address inflammation, and then the challenge is, will it work in the eye? So could be really, really exciting because it's a whole new way of tackling, it's not about pressure, it's the step before pressure, it's a cause for the increased pressure in the first place. So watch this space on that one, but it's super early research. Another piece of research that we're funding is looking at trabeculectomy surgery, which is a type of surgery that people might have if your glaucoma is more advanced. This is a little diagram of it on the screen, and basically it cuts a sort of trapdoor in the surface of your eye, and that helps the fluid, provides an alternative way for the fluid to drain out of the eye into this sort of blister or a bleb. It's eye surgery. People can be a bit afraid of it, and you sometimes get kind of maybe not the best outcome because your recovery was difficult for whatever reason. So this piece of research is talking to people who've had a trabeculectomy and saying, well, where could it have been improved for you? Because if you can, it's to help minimize the kind of negative outcomes of surgery that some people experience. And it's very, very patient focused. And what they're trying to do is produce some patient information that you would then be given in advance of your surgery so that you can understand more about what your surgery might entail and how to minimize the chances of there being a slight kind of adverse outcome at some point with your surgery. So again, it's ongoing, can't tell you the outcomes yet, but a nice example of how you can make treatments that do work, make them even better for patients. That's the hope. Okay, so priority number 2 is how can vision loss be restored for people with glaucoma? And this is a really, really tricky one, I have to say. It's the one that we are furthest away from as a community, from really making kind of significant changes that you might benefit from as a patient. So the themes behind, the sort of drivers behind vision loss being restored is, as we said, it's damage to the optic nerve, and it's also irreversible. And I could do a whole talk about the kind of what's going on in nerve cells. They're super interesting. But if you imagine you have nerve cells that are stretching from the eye to the brain, it's one nerve cell, it's one cell that grows all of that way, and it's been damaged if you have glaucoma. And if you have cut your arm, say, your skin can recover. Your skin cells have the biology to regrow. You might get a bit of scar tissue, but that cut will repair. But if you have damaged your nerve cell, specifically within the sort of brain and spinal cord and eye, which are all part of the same bit, the central nervous system, those cells do not have the capacity to regrow. I don't know why. I'm not a cell biologist, but I know that they don't. For whatever reason, they can't regrow. So if we're trying to restore any vision, we would have to make those nerve cells regrow or grow new nerve cells in a way where they're kind of naturally not going to anyway. So you're having to overcome quite a lot of biology there. And just, I heard a piece of information, which was, if you imagine a cell, one cell is growing from your eye to your brain, that's the same as a person being stretched so they reach from central London to Heathrow Airport. Like, it's crazy how long these cells are. So, and if you imagine when you're in the womb and your eyes are growing, you have all of that machinery and mechanics and systems and chemicals and processes that are telling the nerve cell which way to grow. But if you imagine you were trying to stretch from central London to Heathrow, you need someone to say, oh, no, don't go off that way, that's the M3, you need to keep going along the M4. You need people you need something directing you to get to Heathrow Airport if you were stretching all of that way. But so if you're expecting a nerve cell to regrow from the eye to the brain, it doesn't have anyone pointing it in the right direction. So it grows off in all sorts of different directions. It's very, very, very challenging to regrow those nerve cells without all of the kind of scaffold and support that kind of exists when the cells are growing in the first place, when we're developing in the womb. So that's why it's really, really hard. That's why it saddens me to say this, but I think we're quite a long way from there being real vision loss by regrowing those nerve cells. But that's not to say there isn't work happening. And we are funding some research, which is, if the nerve cells can't regrow, there are other cells that are really good at growing into different types of things, or regrowing or supporting other cells, and they're called stem cells. You may have heard of those, but they're cells that can turn into all sorts of other types of cell. And a researcher that we're working with discovered that the stem cells, he put some into the eye to see if they could sort of grow, and they didn't, but he noticed that they produced these things called exosomes, these little bubbles, kind of soap bubble type things, that seem to be protecting the nerve cells in some way. So they wanted to find out more about these exosomes. So they have looked at stem cells from different sources, from bone, from fat tissue, adipose tissue, from teeth, from a few other different sources. They've grown these stem cells, these sort of magical cells, and they're extracting the exosomes, these little kind of soap bubbles that they produce, and they're examining them to understand what is it inside these little exosomes that seems to be protecting the nerve cells. Because if you can protect the nerves, that's the kind of closest we can get really to restoration of vision at the moment. So they're looking at these things inside the exosomes in kind of petri dishes models in vitro. They're looking in computer models, and they're also, I think, testing in, I think it's rats, but it might be mice, to sort of understand what happens when you put these stem cells into these animals and the exosomes into the animals, and see what's happening with those nerve cells. How can we protect them? So there's work happening, but we are a little bit away, I think, as a community, from restoration of vision in the sense of kind of, reproducing those nerve cells. So number 3, what can be done to avoid late diagnosis of sight-threatening glaucoma? So the thing to think about here is, if we want to protect someone's vision, the most important thing you can do is prevent them from being diagnosed late. That's more important than getting everyone early. There's slightly different vantage points, but the best thing you can do is stop that late diagnosis, because, as we said, glaucoma is is preventable. You need to get people into the system. And we know that kind of age and ethnicity and genetics play a part. So who are the groups of people who genetically are most at risk of losing sight, and who is not going to get their eyes tested? So what are all the things we need to do to find the groups of people who aren't getting into the system, aren't getting their eyes tested, and therefore are most at risk of having a late diagnosis of glaucoma that is more likely to blind them? So the key to this topic, I think, is what we call big data. So there are loads of genes that are in play that cause glaucoma, and each one might have a marginal effect. So finding kind of who the groups are that have the biggest kind of combination of genes that make them most at risk is quite hard work. You have to look at quite a lot of people to be able to pull out those threads. And there are some two projects in particular that are looking at enormous cohorts of people to help identify these, the groups who are most at risk from a genetics point of view. So UK Biobank started some time ago, 10, 15 years ago maybe, and it's looking at 500,000 people across the UK. And there are lots of information collected about all of them, and they're being monitored over time, and they're trying to pull out kind of, okay, so here's the group of people who have glaucoma here, compared to the people who don't have glaucoma. What are the differences within those groups of people, and who within them is most at risk? So you can sort of pull out some patterns from that, and then you can go and say, right, these are the groups of people who are most at risk. These are the people who most need to get their eyes tested to prevent that late diagnosis. And Our Future Health is similar but different. It's even bigger. It's looking at 5 million people that it wants to recruit across the UK. We are an affiliate charity, so we're involved with them. We work quite closely with them. And you can sign up. I have signed up. I'm a participant in Our Future Health. And what you do is you give a blood sample, and they take some basic measurements about you, so your height and your weight and your cholesterol and things, and you also give them permission to access in a secure way your medical records. And the point is that therefore you've got this enormous cohort. You've got 5 million people across the UK, and you can pull out from that over time. You ended up with a diagnosis of glaucoma 10 years later, but we can look in that blood sample and say, are there early signs of that? Is there something going on in your blood that means actually, now, because we've looked at so many of you, we could see a pattern that we couldn't see before that tells us this group of people who have these genes are most at risk. So it's where you sort of these massive projects are using the power of big data and AI and all sorts of bits and pieces that pull out some patterns that might be harder to see in other ways, particularly, as I said, because glaucoma tends to develop quite slowly. So it can be hard to see these patterns over a really long period of time. You need to be able to take a good perspective. So number 4 is, what is the most effective way of monitoring the progression of glaucoma? So the key attributes of glaucoma are that it's symptomless for this one. So you can't monitor your own glaucoma yourself at home without any equipment. And it's quite slow. So you're not going to see the changes yourself because your body will be adapting to it. So it means at the moment, obviously, you have to go for your dreaded visual field test every so often. That enables you to monitor enables you and the clinician to monitor your glaucoma. But visual field tests are an imperfect device. They're the best we have, but they could be an awful lot better. And so there's an awful lot of work going into kind of how can we make visual field testing, or a new version of visual field testing that is better, is quicker at identifying who's most at risk of losing their sight, is less horrendous for you guys to complete, that make it better from a patient point of view, as well as getting more important information out from a clinical point of view. So here is a slide from a colleague that we're funding, where he's looking at trying to pull out from visual field tests more effectively, more quickly, more reliably, who are the people who are most at risk of losing sight. Or if you're not at risk of losing sight, if your glaucoma is really, really slow, then maybe you don't need to worry. We can see you less often, or you can go, take fewer eye drops or something. So this is about, is trying to get rid of trying to cut through the noise that's happening in visual field tests. So this is one patient, and this is a visual field test. You're probably familiar with them, but the white spots are where you can see, and the black spots are where your vision has been damaged. So this is one person over time, and you can see overall their vision is getting worse. There are more black spots over to the right than there were at the beginning. So their vision is declining. But you can see it's a pretty bumpy line. You know, it looks between visual field test 2 and 3 that their vision's improved. I said before, you can't. Once you've lost it, you've lost it. So what's really, and this is a completely normal set of results. It's completely normal for someone's vision to go, well, their visual field test, sorry, to be up and down. But that's not very helpful. What you want is that you have a really good understanding of what that line is, so that therefore, if you don't, you know, if you're more at risk of losing sight, the doctor can act quickly and give you another treatment that might do, you know, more invasive treatment usually. So maybe a surgery that means you're more likely to, you know, it's a bit harder working at lowering your pressure. But also if you're not likely to lose sight, you can be on fewer drops. So there's lots of research trying to understand how to make visual field tests better so that they're more reliable, the information we get from it is better, so that your experience as a patient in the system, you know, you get the right treatment straight away. You don't have this kind of what's the best one for me, because you have a much better sense of your own vision loss, because the visual field test, the data can be analysed in super clever, magical, mathematical ways that give us more insight into that individual. So we're funding, this is our new fellow, Giovanni Montesano, is looking at this and trying to understand more from our data. So number 5 is what causes glaucoma. Big one, this one. And as we said, we know it's damage to the optic nerve, but some people have optic nerves that are more susceptible, and some people have optic nerves that seem to be resilient. As we said, age and ethnicity and genetics are also playing a part. So in order to answer this question, we need to really understand what are all the different factors at play, and what role are they all having in meaning some people develop glaucoma and others don't. So this is a graph which is telling us a bit about the genetics behind glaucoma. So it's called a Manhattan plot because it looks a little bit like the Manhattan skyline with all the skyscrapers. And along the x-axis, this axis, the horizontal one, you can see all the different, these are all the genes. It's called the genome. All of our genes arranged into our 23 pairs of chromosomes. And the vertical axis, the y-axis, is looking at, does this gene at this point on the genome seem to have something to do with glaucoma? So the higher the spot is on the graph, the stronger the association between that gene and glaucoma. So this one way up here on the top left, gosh, that TMC01, doesn't matter what the numbers are, that seems to have a really strong association with glaucoma. And this one in the middle seems to have quite a strong association. So if you've got this gene variant, you're much more likely to have glaucoma. So what the researchers are doing now, as our genetics analysis gets more and more powerful, they're able to pull out more and more genes that seem to have something involved in glaucoma. If you have this gene, you have this variant of the gene, you have glaucoma. So then the next job for the researchers to say, well, what does this gene do? So then you go back and you understand what is this gene doing in our body that is causing glaucoma or maybe preventing glaucoma. So it's about, you're sort of going back from the problem and trying to work back to sort of see what's going on that might be leading to someone have glaucoma. So as our genetics, analysis gets more and more powerful, we'll pull out more and more things that seem to have a relationship with glaucoma and understand what's driving it, where are the genes that are doing something to someone's glaucoma. There are other ways you can look at what's causing glaucoma, and I'll talk now about another project that we're funding, similar to the other one I was talking about with antibodies, but looking again at the trabecular meshwork, this bit that the fluid is draining through, and saying, well, there seems to be some scarring that's going on inside the trabecular meshwork, and the trabecular meshwork it's super clever. It acts like a kind of pump. It's pumping that fluid out to get it out of the eye and back into the blood to sort of drain back into the rest of the system. And And if there's scar tissue, if there's scarring in there, if you've got any scars in your body, you know it can be quite stiff. So that scarring is stopping the trabecular meshwork from being able to pump and stopping it from being able to drain the fluid out of the eye. So another group that we're funding is looking at that scarring inside the trabecular meshwork and saying, well, if we can stop the scarring, maybe we can keep that fluid draining, keep that trabecular meshwork working as it should, and stop the pressure from rising and being this thing that seems to be causing glaucoma in some way. So there's lots and lots, because glaucoma is quite a complex disease. It's not sort of one thing that's causing it. There's lots of researchers that are sort of attacking this problem from all different directions that are enabling us to understand a bit more about what might be driving glaucoma. Is it from an anatomical point of view and scarring, from a genetics point of view, from a kind of what's happening at the back of the eye, lots of different approaches that are telling us a bit about what might be causing glaucoma. And finally, the last one, is there a link between treatment adherence and glaucoma progression, and how can adherence be improved? So treatment adherence is if you're given eye drops, how well are you taking your eye drops? Are you taking them every day as prescribed, or are you not? Are they, that principle of are you taking them every day? Are they actually making it into your eye every single day? So as we said, there are kind of lots of things that are happening behind glaucoma, and one of them is age, and some of that could be as we get older. It gets harder to put in eye drops because your hands, you lose a bit of dexterity, or you're stiff. It's harder to put your eye drop in. So there are lots of factors at play here that might be influencing someone's adherence, and it develops quite slowly. And that's what I think is really striking about this is the question is still, is there a link? So we can see that there is evidence that people who take an eye drop tends to have slower progression. Their glaucoma develops more slowly, but it's quite weak, the actual link between how well you take your eye drops every day and the likelihood of your glaucoma progressing. And that's because there are so many other different factors in play, and there's lots of different causes behind your glaucoma that mean lowering the eye pressure is only one aspect, is the only one we can control. So it's super important. So don't take this as a sign to not take your eye drops. This is the thing you can do, is take your eye drops, but the link is still quite hard to understand. And because it's quite slow, it means it's really hard to be able to spot a pattern really clearly. So we are again funding some work in this area, which is a really neat project actually. I wish I could show you an image, but again, it hasn't been published, so I can't. Which is a group in Cardiff in Wales. We're looking at developing a sticky label that went onto an eye drop bottle that monitored every time that bottle got squeezed. And that would say to the researchers, okay, it's not going to tell you if the drop made it in the eye, but at least it will tell you if someone's attempting to do it, squeezing the bottle every day as prescribed. And it would track that. So then you'd be able to look at that data and you'd be able to say, okay, well, this person is taking their eye drops as they should. But what they realized was they could turn the research into a way that is more helpful for patients. So instead of it being on a label, it's on a dispensing aid. So it every time it sort of looks a bit like a pair of pliers. You may have seen dispensing aids before, and it has sort of paddles on it that help you squeeze the bottle. So you put your eye drop into this dispensing aid, and it every time you squeeze the paddles to help you get the eye drop into your eye, there's a sensor in there that detects that it's been squeezed and collects all of that data, and then that data can be sent to your doctor, and you can have a look at kind of, you are taking your eye drops every day, you're not, you think you are, but it helps the researchers to understand actually what's going on with that individual. Are they using their eye drops as they should? But it's helping the patient at the same time, because it's all of that information has been stored within the dispensing aid. So again, it's quite early days in that. They haven't it's not available yet, that dispensing aid, but I really like it because it's an example where the research is directly producing a device that's really, really helpful for the individual as well as the research, because there's no point doing the research if it's not going to ultimately help the most important people in the room, which is everyone with glaucoma. So I will wrap up soon because I'm aware that there are probably some questions. So there are other sections in the UK clinical eye research strategy that are relevant to glaucoma. So there's one in childhood onset about how can the prevention, diagnosis and treatment of optic nerve disorders, including glaucoma in children, be improved. So there's something in there about childhood glaucomas, which are particularly tricky, but relatively rare. In the cornea section of the clinical eye research strategy, there is a question about dry eye treatment. So lots of people with glaucoma also have dry eye because the eye drops can make your eyes quite dry. They affect the surface of the eye. So, there's bits in the cornea strategy that also link to glaucoma through dry eye. And there's also bits about pathways. So this is a bit of a mouthful, but does the enhanced integration of ophthalmic primary and secondary care via community optometric care pathways lead to improved detection, treatment and management of eye disease and to improved patient quality of life? What that means in plain English is if people, they were being seen in the hospital, if we move that care system so that they're being seen in a community optometry practice or, not in a hospital, in another setting in the community, does that lead to better outcomes? So people are, their glaucoma or other eye diseases are more effectively managed, and does it make life better for the patient? So there are kind of, bits in the strategy about the pathway that you guys are navigating and how that could be improved as well. So hopefully you've been left thinking, this is cool, I want to get involved. And there are lots of ways for people with glaucoma to get involved in research. And it is really important across the whole of healthcare research that as many people as possible get involved in research in different ways. So I implore you, please sort of go away and think about how you can get involved. It's great. It's really important that research is done in a way that benefits the most important beneficiaries, which is the general public, its patients. And lots of researchers are crying out for people to get involved more, and they want to tell you about the research. So you can get involved. There are different ways. If you go on our website, you can go to our research hub, and there is a page there called Take Part in Research. And we have different projects that you could be. That could just be a quick survey, or it could be even something as significant as sitting on a committee of researchers and sort of helping the researchers deliver that project, and you're there to represent people with glaucoma and make sure that the research is done in a way that is going to benefit you. So this could be, there's all sorts of ways to get involved. We flag them as well in our focus. So if you're on our email newsletter, you'll hear about different opportunities that we can tell you about. If you become a member, you can, I'm trying to write more and more in our Insight magazine about different, the research that we're funding and the impact that that's had. And we're hoping to plan some sort of events for members and things where you can meet researchers more and more. And also research is really expensive, so we can only carry on doing it if we have the input of so many amazing people who support us and our research funding in different ways. So loads of things that you could do to get involved in this and be a kind of active participant in research. There's loads of data about how it's good for people to get involved in research. People tend to really enjoy it. Yeah. And expect to see more. As I said, we're sort of growing our research work, so hopefully you'll see more and more in different ways about the research that we are funding and supporting. And that is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. So Jo spoke very enthusiastically about all the research. It's very much in its early days, some of the findings of the research. So some of the questions have come through are about clinicians, for a clinician. Jo is not a qualified clinician, so any questions that are around the medical aspect we'll not be looking at now. So let's try and work our way through. There's been a few questions about stem cell, Jo, within the chat. So I don't know what. So one was, have gene and stem cell therapies been trialed for glaucoma? I know you did talk about that within the presentation. And when will the results be available?
So I think by trialed, do you mean have they made it to patients? To be honest, I don't think so. I don't know. As I'm not a researcher, I'm not necessarily totally up to date with where things have got to. We have published in the next Insight, the picture you saw with the stem cells talks. There's an article in there which goes into more detail about that PhD project, and he'll be finishing the PhD in October, so probably published sometime after that, end of the year, that particular piece of work. But there's lots of other work that's going on into stem cell, potential of stem cells to help with nerve recovery things.
Okay, so let's work through. Thank you. So again, we're going to focus on questions around research.
Mhm.
So again, you didn't talk about this, but is there any research about a link between cholesterol levels and glaucoma?
I don't know. Sorry,
No.
I
Okay.
just don't know. I'm not aware of any, but that doesn't mean there isn't any. I'm
Okay.
not aware of a link at all.
Again, this is always the burning question. Will there be a treatment that halts sight loss? And that you talked about that during the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, how long is ever is a long time, isn't it? So I'm sure there will, and I think treatments will just get better and better, and there might be new types of treatment. I mean, there are treatments that halt sight loss for most people. It's just they're not the universal treatment. That's what we haven't quite got to. Yeah, that doesn't exist yet, but give it time. I'm sure it will.
Again, just focusing on ones around research. Anything else? We're not going to give priority tonight because we have very little time. Is there research looking at normal tensional glaucoma and its treatment? I know you haven't. That's a popular question. 3 people have ticked it.
Yes, lots. And again, we're publishing some, we're funding some research into normal tension glaucoma, that's looking at particularly, there seems to be a link between how well your mitochondria work, which is the little sort of powerhouses inside your cells that help your cells kind of get energy, and people who generally seems to be that people with normal tension glaucoma have less effective mitochondria than the rest of the population. So now the follow-up work is trying to understand what's different about those mitochondria, why are they less effective. And I can see a few points about vitamin B3. Seems to be that there's something about vitamin B3 that is helping those mitochondria work more effectively, that might be protecting the nerve cells. So yeah, they're all linked. That kind of vitamin B3, normal tension, and sort of what the health of nerve cells are all kind of linked from a research point of view.
Back to the gene question, will the gene research lead to gene editing treatments? Which is very interesting to think of the future.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't have my crystal ball with me this evening. Gene editing is quite hard because you have to access the genes, the cells at the back of the eye, or sort of you have to get the genes into the back of the eye, and that's quite challenging. So I suspect there'll be other routes rather than gene editing.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
other means of protecting the nerve cells in different ways.
Somebody's asked a very good question. How do you choose where the funding goes to and what projects get the funding? Suppose everything you talked about tonight, you've related to
We
our funding.
haven't really covered that. So we are introductory members of the Association of Medical Research Charities, which is a sort of umbrella group, and we follow their guidance. We're working towards meeting their guidance completely. And that basically uses a process called expert review. So I'm in the midst of it at the moment. Our latest funding round closed yesterday. So all of those applications that I've received, I'll send out to different experts. So they might be researchers who are actively working. They might be people who, some of them are in kind of Australia and Austria and America and things, who are specialists who can look at that application in way more detail than I can and can say, this is really good, or no, this is flawed. So we use their input, and then we have a panel meeting where all of those, some of the experts, by the way, experts patients that we're just working with at the moment, and in future we'll be recruiting more. So all of those different experts say, yes, I like this one, or I don't like this one, or this is really good. And then at the panel meeting, we look at all of those applications and we make a decision about which ones look the best. And the other prong to that is a research strategy, which I'm just developing, which will set out in more detail, which of those 6 themes do we think are most important? What do we think as the patient community? What are the areas of the sort of biggest unanswered questions or the gaps and things? So, a whole bunch of different factors. And if you want to get involved in any of that, just email research@glaucoma.uk.
Brilliant, Joe. We have two more questions and then we'll finish up. So one, it's a very focused question. It's the last one there about back. So it's saying about, is there any work being done to encourage eye drop manufacturers to use less damaging preservatives than back, thus reducing ocular surface damage? So again, do you know if anything that's in the pipeline in relation to?
I think the work there is more about the kind of manufacturing research. So how do you design new bottles that mean you don't need a preservative? So you may have seen these new bottle designs that they sort of tend to have a little blue nipple on the top as a dropping device, and that means you don't need a preservative in there. So there is research going on, and that research is usually done by pharma companies, where I referred at the beginning to the different players. They will be doing that research about how they can, they know that preservatives such as BAC are not good. So how can they still produce a safe drop? The most important thing is that it's safe. You don't want someone to get an eye infection because of their eye drop. So they have to have that safety profile. So what other ways are there of making an eye drop safe other than using a preservative? And at the moment, I think it's about bottle design, but that's slightly outside my area of expertise. But there's definitely work going on in that bit, and it's definitely funded by pharma companies.
So the last question before we finish up is, somebody wants to know how they can access results of the published research, Joe, around glaucoma.
So there's different ways. A project that I'm doing at the moment is improving our page on our website, which is about research we've funded. So I want to make it much easier for people to understand what we've funded and the difference that's had. I'm trying to write more in Insight about that as well. So if you join as a member and you get Insight, you'll be able to hear more about that. Lots more research is being done in what's called open access journals. So all the papers are published, they're available, but they tend to be behind paywall, so you need a subscription that's very expensive. But there is a move in the world of research to make things more open and more transparent, and move to things called open access. So you can just have a look. You can search and try and find things on different open access things, like Google can help you find stuff. And it's a sort of general move within the system to make things more accessible. So there's not one answer to that, sorry, but I'm trying to do more to make it easier for you all to understand what's being done.
And hopefully, Joe, we'll have you back in the future with an update on some of the research.
If the interest is there.
Yeah. Sorry, last one, because this one's, somebody asked about item number 3. What can be done to avoid? So please can I have the telephone number for item number 3? What can be done to avoid late diagnosis? Is it on the research hub? I can't remember.
I don't think there's a phone number. There wouldn't be a particular point of contact, because it's just a theme. It's not kind of a person that's
Okay.
sitting there. So if you have a particular question, as I say, contact research@glaucoma.uk, or any email, the helpline or anything, and it will make its way to me, and I can try and understand your question a bit more. I'm not quite sure I understand it at the moment.
Brilliant, Joe. Thank you so much. I have learned so much. I've been beaving away writing notes. And it's interesting, you talked about the antibody. I'm actually meeting that person in Northern Ireland in March. Sorry, in June. So I'm looking forward to hearing. He's coming actually to a support group to talk about that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. There's loads going on. It's the Centre for Personalised Medicine at Ulster, and we've funded other bits in the past. It's interesting stuff that comes out of there.
Looking forward. So before we finish up now, I'm going to launch the poll. Just let me kind of do our last slide before I put the poll up. So the poll. So at the start, I asked you a question in relation to research. I'm now going to ask the one at the end to see if we can. Sorry, I'm just closing the other one before I do the next one. Where are we now? So let's kind of look at where we are at the moment. Okay, so same one question. How much do you know about research? I think for me, it's given me more questions and answers, but I'm really keen to learn more.
Yeah, I know, that's the thing. You start digging and you just want to go more and more.
And you're so enthusiastic, Joe, about it. So yeah, we're nearly there. We're finished now, so that's it. So just let me now close this down and go back to, my presentation. Sorry, stop sharing and go back to my presentation. So just to let you know, so our next sets of DGSGs that are coming up. So we have one coming up now in May, and the one in May is around advancing glaucoma. It'll be speakers will be Paul Wallace, beg your pardon, a low vision specialist, and Rakesh Patel, a person who has lived experience. That's from 78. And then looking towards June, we have one on glaucoma and eye drops, and it'll be our very own helpline advisor, Kieran, is going to talk about that. Again, if some of the questions our helpline may not be able to help you with research, but as Joe said, come back to Joe, research@glaucoma.uk if you have any questions around research. And lastly, just to read this out, just a reminder that your circumstances are unique to you. So you're thinking of making any lifestyle or medical changes as a result of this webinar, please speak to your eye specialist first. Glaucoma UK and the speaker are not responsible for any action you might take as a result of the information you learned through this webinar. If you have any other questions you would like to ask, again, come back to Joe or go to our helpline. The details are on the screen. Okay, so that's it finished for the day, for the night, everybody. Thank you all so much for spending the evening with us. We look forward to seeing you in May.